Greetings, dear subscribers and casual listeners of my channel. We all remember the events that unfolded during the Triwizard Tournament in Goblet of Fire. But behind the spectacular scenes, dangerous tasks and dramatic moments lies a much deeper history. The tournament has survived centuries and is filled with secrets, incidents, and surprising facts that many fans have never even heard of. Today I'll tell you all about those hidden details. Enjoy the video. Number 1. The Muggle Prime Minister was informed about the tournament. It turns out the Muggle government isn't as far removed from the magical world as it seems. At the beginning of Half-Blood Prince, we learn that Cornelius Fudge paid regular visits to the Muggle Prime Minister, and one of those visits concerned the Triwizard Tournament. The Muggle leader was warned in advance that dragons from Romania would be brought into Britain, since they were meant to be the first task. Later, the Prime Minister was also informed about the Sphinx for the third task. Given the potential danger, Fudge clearly wanted to be cautious and prevent any unpleasant surprises magical creatures might cause in the Muggle world. Number 2. The 1792 incident. The tournament has always been notorious for danger, but in 1792 an episode occurred that put the competition on hold for nearly 2 centuries. One of the tasks required champions to capture a cockatrice, a creature that looks like a rooster with a lizard's tail. The challenge seemed manageable until the cockatrice broke free, caused utter chaos, and attacked all 3 school delegations. After this incident, the tournament was deemed too dangerous and suspended indefinitely. Attempts to resurrect the tradition were made several times, but none succeeded until the events of 1994. Number 3. No age restrictions in the original tournament. The rule requiring participants to be at least 17 years old is actually a recent addition. In earlier centuries, a wizard, age didn't matter at all. Fred and George Weasley would have been delighted to live in the 14th or 15th century. No Dumbledore's age line, no restrictions. The only rule that remained constant was each school may send only 1 champion. Number 4. The tournament was held every 5 years. To ensure that the inter-school competition remained a major event, it was scheduled regularly, once every 5 years. At first glance, such large intervals make the tournament seem rare. But considering the tradition began in the 13th century, the total number of tournaments exceeds 100, making it comparable to the Muggle Olympic Games. Number 5. Durmstrang has never won. The tournament is statistics surprise even seasoned fans of the magical world. Of the 3 schools, Hogwarts, Beauxbatons and Durmstrang, only one has never held the cup. Yes, Durmstrang has not won a single victory throughout its entire history. This is especially ironic considering that Victor Krum, one of the strongest young wizards of his time, studied there. But the fact remains, Durmstrang has endured a losing streak spanning roughly 125 tournaments. Number 6. Hogwarts won 63 times, Beauxbatons 62. While Durmstrang struggled, its competitors were neck and neck. By the time the 1994 tournament began, Hogwarts and Beauxbatons were tied. Things changed after the events of Goblet of Fire, when victory was awarded jointly to Harry Potter and Cedric Diggory. Technically, this broke the 1 school, 1 champion rule, but Hogwarts still received the point, and with this single win, it surpassed Beauxbatons. Number 7. The tournament is over 700 years old. The Triwizard Tournament is one of the oldest competitions in the magical world. Its origins date back to 1294, when Hogwarts, Beauxbatons and Durmstrang decided to create a tradition that would strengthen friendly relations between Europe's leading magical schools. Over time, the tournament grew from a small contest into a grand international event, shaping a school, its reputation, and serving as a stage for the display of magical mastery. Number 8. The goblet didn't always choose one champion. The rule was simple: one school, one champion. Yet in 1994, the Goblet of Fire broke its own tradition and named 2 champions for Hogwarts: Cedric Diggory and Harry Potter. The Great Hall erupted in confusion. Even Dumbledore, usually calm, demanded, "Did you put your name in the Goblet of Fire, Harry?" The goblet had never erred before. Its choice stunned every expert who believed its enchantments were infallible. The official explanation points to sabotage. Barty Crouch Jr., disguised as Moody, tampered with the goblet and tricked it into selecting Harry as a 4th champion. But some wizards still whisper another theory. They claim the goblet sensed something powerful in Harry, a destiny, a fracture of magic, a mark that defied logic. Perhaps the fire did not choose wrongly. Perhaps it simply recognized a champion who stood on the edge of 2 worlds, carrying a fate larger than the tournament itself. Number 9. The tournament inspired famous duelists. In earlier centuries, the Triwizard Tournament was more than a test of wit and courage. It was also a celebration of magical combat. Certain tasks were designed to force champions into direct duels, not out of hostility, but as a display of elegance and discipline. Wizards called it the art of controlled lightning. Even in Goblet of Fire, Dumbledore remarks that proper dueling requires not anger, but clarity. The tournament once embraced that philosophy fully. 2 legendary duelists, Edgar Lafont of Beauxbatons and Isabelle Lemierre of Hogwarts, first rose to fame on this very stage. Their clash in the tournament of 1621 became the stuff of folklore. Lafont's spells were sharp and dazzling. Lemierre's were fluid and unpredictable. Witnesses said their duel looked like a storm painted in blue fire. Neither won the task, but both became overnight celebrities. Their performance inspired schools across Europe to open formal dueling academies. The fame came with consequences. By the mid-17th century, the tournament briefly introduced an official dueling event, a standalone contest judged on precision, control, and creativity. But passion quickly overshadowed restraint. Injuries became frequent, rivalries turned personal. One report from 1674 describes a champion who refused to lower his wand, even after the judges intervened. The ministry declared the event too dangerous, and it was removed from the program. Yet stories of Lafont and Lemierre still circulate, reminding wizards that the tournament once shaped not only champions, but legends. Number 10. The prize wasn't always money. Most people assume the Triwizard Prize was always gold and glory. The 1,000 galleons mentioned in Goblet of Fire made that idea stick. But in earlier centuries, champions fought for rewards far more mysterious. Wizards of the Middle Ages believed that true honor came not from wealth, but from rare relics. As an old Beauxbatons record states, gold fades, magic endures, and so the prizes reflected that belief. Some winners received enchanted staffs carved from elder branches. Others earned tailor-made invisibility cloaks or the coveted right to study abroad for a season under a foreign master. Yet the most extraordinary prize of all appeared in 1463 when the champion of Durmstrang, Lucas Erhard, was granted an amulet containing a single drop of wyvern dragon blood, The amulet shimmered like burning glass and was said to grant complete protection from fire. Chronicles describe Earhart holding it aloft as the crowd roared. The artifact later vanished from the records, leaving its fate a mystery. Even Dumbledore once hinted that the tournament's past held treasures far more curious than coin. The idea of such prizes still captures imaginations. Some historians claim the amulet resurfaced briefly in the 18th century. Others insist it lies locked in a vault beneath Gringotts, but the truth remains unknown, and the story of the Wyvern's blood has grown into one of the tournament's most enduring legends. Number 11, there was a zero task. Old manuscripts tell of a forgotten stage of the tournament known as the zero task. It came before the 3 official challenges. It tested not strength, not spell work, but the heart. Wizards believed that a champion unsteady in spirit would fail no matter how skilled. As one medieval scholar wrote, "Magic obeys the wand but honors the soul." The zero task was meant to reveal that soul. The task placed the champion inside an illusion crafted from charms and rare artifacts. Nothing there was real, yet every choice felt heavy. The champion had to face a dilemma: betray another for personal victory, or sacrifice something precious to preserve honor. One famous account from 1471 describes a Beauxbatons witch named Elise Marvaux, who chose to save her rival inside the illusion, knowing it would cost her the win. When she emerged, trembling and pale, the judges rose to their feet. Her choice became legend. Whether modern champions ever face this trial remains a mystery. No official record confirms it. Some scholars insist that Dumbledore, with his deep respect for moral courage, would have supported the tradition. Others believe he avoided it to spare the students unnecessary trauma. The ministry, of course, denied everything. As one official famously muttered to the prophet, "We have enough real problems without inventing imaginary ones." Rumors still persist that in 1994 the zero task was deliberately removed. The organizers feared its unpredictability. They needed tighter control over every stage of the revived tournament, and illusions that forced students to confront betrayal and sacrifice were anything but predictable. Whether the goblet accepted this alteration or merely tolerated it is a question that continues to stir debates among magical historians even today. Number 12. The revival of the tournament was officially banned. After the disastrous events of 1792, the Ministry of Magic did more than pause the tournament. It issued an official ban on hosting any future Triwizard competitions. The decree was strict and uncompromising. Archivists later found a copy signed by Minister Leopold Hargreaves, who wrote, "No tradition is worth a student's life." His words became a grim reminder of the chaos unleashed by the escaped cockatrice. For generations, the ban was treated as absolute law. The prohibition lasted nearly 2 centuries. Countless proposals to revive the tournament failed before they even reached the Wizengamot. Yet whispers persisted. Some saw the tournament as a lost jewel of magical heritage. Others believed it should stay buried. The breakthrough came only in the 1990s when 2 powerful figures, Albus Dumbledore and Madame Olympe Maxime, personally negotiated with the ministry. Each argued that cooperation between schools mattered more than fear. As Dumbledore put it, "We cannot build unity by hiding from the past." In the end, the ministry agreed to a compromise. The ban would be temporarily suspended, but only under the label of an experimental restoration of historical tradition. Every step had to be documented, every task pre-approved, Every creature licensed and guarded, even the goblet itself was placed under additional monitoring spells. Many officials still opposed the idea, warning that the tournament carried old dangers that no regulation could tame. We all know how the experiment ended. Cedric Diggory. His death shattered any illusion of safety. The ministry immediately reinstated the original ban, this time without debate. Since then, no official document has ever mentioned the tournament again. And whenever the Triwizard Cup is discussed in academic circles, someone inevitably sighs and repeats the line from Goblet of Fire. Magic can be magnificent, but it can also be merciless. Number 13. Judges were often not impartial. Although the tournament was presented as a competition judged purely on merit, the reality was often messier. Bias slipped in through pride, rivalry, and old grudges between schools. Even Dumbledore once remarked, "Fairness is a delicate thing, easily bruised." Scores varied not only by performance but by the flag stitched on a champion's robes. Whispers of favoritism followed the tournament for centuries. The most infamous scandal erupted in 1738. The judge was Madame Cornelia Blasco, a celebrated alumna of Beauxbatons and a witch known for her icy composure. During the second task, the Beauxbatons champion failed entirely. She panicked, lost her wand, and had to be rescued by officials before the Grindylows dragged her under. The audience gasped, the hall fell into confused silence, and yet Blasco lifted her quill and calmly awarded her champion 10 points, full marks, no hesitation. The reaction was immediate. Hogwarts headmaster Elias Thorne slammed his fist onto the judges' table so hard that the inkpots jumped. Durmstrang's director, Arvid Cargan, shouted across the platform, accusing Blasco of turning the tournament into theatre. Several eyewitnesses later wrote that the two men reached for their wands at the same moment, and only the intervention of ministry envoys prevented a public duel. One Goblin reporter noted, had sparks flown, they would have burned down the entire tent. The scandal forced the Wizengamot to intervene. Within weeks, a new regulation was drafted. At least 2 judges must come from neutral countries with no historical ties to any of the 3 schools. It was an attempt to restore faith in the tournament's integrity. And ever since 1738, whenever a judge hesitates over a score, someone inevitably mutters the same reminder. Remember Blasco, the fire must judge, not the flag. Number 14. Participants could refuse, but almost never did. According to the tournament charter, even if the Goblet of Fire selected your name, you technically had the right to refuse. But in reality, this was almost unthinkable. Backing out meant shame. It suggested fear. It stained not only the champion's reputation, but the honor of the entire school. As Professor McGonagall once warned her students, the Triwizard Tournament is not a game. It is a commitment. Refusing that commitment carried a heavy price. Throughout the tournament of 7 centuries, only 4 champions ever dared to withdraw. The most notorious case took place in 1667 when a young Durmstrang wizard named Hugo Elstrom stepped forward before the assembled judges and declared, "I will not fight for a master I no longer respect." His voice shook, but he did not take the words back. The hall fell silent. His classmates looked away. His courage, or his foolishness, immediately became the most discussed scandal of that decade. Durmstrang's headmaster at the time, Branik Volkov, reacted swiftly. Elstrom was expelled the next morning without a ceremony, without farewells. His wand was confiscated. His name was struck from the school rolls, an erasure far more symbolic than practical. For years, Ntpulan Elstrom became a phrase whispered across magical Europe, meaning to give up in the face of duty. Students used it as an insult, teachers used it as a warning. The irony, of course, is that Elstrom's refusal later inspired scholars to question the harshness of tournament traditions. But none of that helped him in his own lifetime. His story survived only because it was retold again and again, usually as a cautionary tale. And every time a student stood before the goblet, their mentors repeated the same quiet reminder: once the fire chooses, you do not walk away. Number 15. Some tasks were deliberately deadly. The Tri-Wizard Tournament has always been wrapped in the gilded language of tradition, bravery, and inter-school camaraderie, yet its true history is far harsher than what the polished banners of Hogwarts, Beauxbatons, and Durmstrang suggest. Even in the modern era, where magical regulators boast that the competition has been made as safe as humanly possible, the remnants of a darker philosophy remain visible to any careful observer. Many forget that when Dumbledore told Harry, "People change in the maze," he was not merely warning about enchantments. He was echoing centuries of caution from headmasters who watched champions walk into tasks that were never designed with survival as a guaranteed outcome. The legends surrounding these earlier tournaments paint a portrait of magical education that prized courage above life itself. And within these stories, a deeper truth emerges. The tournament was never just a test of skill, but a negotiation with danger, intentionally crafted and unapologetically unforgiving. Long before magical ministries established committees, guidelines, and enchanted barriers, the tournament was supervised by the instincts and cultural expectations of the three schools alone, each with its own vision of what constituted proper wizarding trials. Durmstrang, proud of its reputation for producing powerful duelists, favoured elemental challenges that could swallow an inattentive wizard whole. Beauxbatons, steeped in ancient magical rituals, often designed tasks involving untamed creatures from the Pyrenees, which were beautiful in legend and brutal in fact. Hogwarts, though no less daring, preferred trials focused on cunning, endurance, and the manipulation of hostile environments. This triad of philosophies created tasks that reflected both cooperation and rivalry, and it was widely accepted that a champion who fell during competition had somehow proven unworthy. The phrase triumvir morte probatur, reportedly engraved on the early tournament cup, captures the grim ethos of this era. Excellence is measured, but so is the willingness to face the possibility of death. The most chilling example recorded in school archives is the tournament of 1430, the year Armand Wafflin represented Hogwarts, Elise Corvin represented Beauxbatons, and the fiercely ambitious Marcus Draganov came from Durmstrang. Their second task, deceptively simple in description, required the champions to cross the Lake of Lawnwick, a vast slate-coloured body of water that lay several miles from the old Hogwarts grounds. What made this lake notorious was its population of mature graphorns, creatures classified as XXXXXX by the Ministry today, but at that time not yet fully understood. Early accounts described these graphorns as more territorial than their modern counterparts, capable of moving through water with surprising swiftness, their horns slicing the surface like jagged reef spikes. Magical historians still debate why the task designers believed this a fair trial, but old meeting records suggest that the judges considered it a precaution against Utah champions who rely solely on spellcasting and not on their instinct for raw survival. When the task began, the spectators expected spectacle rather than horror. The lake shimmered under a rare, cloudless sky, and the three champions advanced toward the water's edge with equal parts determination and apprehension. Wafflin attempted to craft stepping-stone charms across the surface, a technique later taught in enchanted terrain classes, but the magic destabilized as soon as the Graphorn sensed vibration, causing the young wizard to plunge into the frigid depths. Corvin, known for her graceful control of water-based spells, tried to part the lake into a narrow corridor. However, the creatures reacted aggressively to the sudden exposure of the lake bed. Draganov, relying on brute magical force, conjured a flaming barrier intended to frighten the beasts, an act that proved catastrophic when the flames triggered a stampede beneath the water. Of the three, only Draganov survived, dragged ashore by two professors after nearly an hour of desperate struggle. Corvin's body was recovered days later, and Wafflin was never found. The ministry's citation, issued retroactively many centuries later, describes the incident with unsettling brevity. Task concluded with excessive and unintended fatality among participants. Yet early tournament chroniclers make clear that such events were neither shocking nor career-ending for the organizers. Instead, they were perceived as tragic but acceptable losses in the pursuit of shaping extraordinary witches and wizards. Magical parents of the 15th century signed consent parchments knowing that a percentage of champions would never return. It is difficult for modern readers to fathom this mindset, particularly given Dumbledore's later sentiment that to hurt is human, but to maim through carelessness is unforgivable. But in those earlier eras, headmasters believed that danger was not a byproduct of the tournament, it was its essence. A safe Triwizard tournament would have been considered not only dull but dishonorable, a betrayal of magical heritage. The gradual softening of tournament rules can be traced to the late 16th century when the wizarding world began to formalize ethics around magical creature treatment, spellcasting limits, and student safety. The 1582 Codex of Magical Moderation, preserved today in the restricted section, was the first document to declare that inter-school competitions must not require the deliberate placing of students in mortal peril without adequate countermeasures. The code was not universally followed, and some headmasters quietly opposed it. Nevertheless, it marked the beginning of a cultural shift. The language of glory slowly gave way to the language of guardianship. Champions were still tested to their limits, but the expectation that they might not survive began to diminish. This ideological evolution explains why later generations found the 1430 lake task so ghastly, and why Dumbledore, centuries later, insisted repeatedly that the tournament revived in Harry's 4th year needed magical protections, immeasurably stronger than any used in the past. Number 16. The goblet sometimes chose the tasks. The earliest chronicles of the Triwizard Tournament describe a tradition so strange and so unpredictable that later generations treated it as myth. Those who lived in the age when the tournament was still new claimed the Goblet of Fire possessed not only the power to select champions, but also the uncanny capacity to forge the trial that each competitor would face. As the dusty vellum of the Codex Arcanum recounts, the goblet's blue flames did not merely illuminate names, they flickered with intention, shimmering as though contemplating the secret nature of every witch and wizard whose parchment slipped into its depths. Witnesses wrote of flames that hissed, darkened, or surged upward moments before issuing a challenge, and many describe the eerie sensation that the goblet knew its champion personally, as if it were a reader of souls rather than a vessel of enchanted fire. Historians often cite the tournament of 1294, held at the remote Fortress School of Beauxbatons, as the most striking example of this forgotten custom. In those days, the goblet had been placed on a marble pedestal lined with runes that pulsed whenever a new challenger stepped forward. The French champion, Aveline du Marais, a witch blessed with extraordinary grace but terrified of the deep sea, stood shaking before the fire at the moment her name erupted from its heart. No task scroll followed her selection, no instruction was handed down by judges. Instead, according to the ancient record, the flames turned a deep oceanic violet, and a low hum resonated across the hall. From that very vibration the first task materialized, a spectral tide that flooded the courtyard and formed into a writhing mass of water serpents she alone could see and battle. Hogwarts law preserves its own example in the contested tournament of 1321, during which the British champion, Cedricus Hawthorne, faced an entirely different ordeal than his foreign rivals. Hawthorne was renowned for his encyclopedic knowledge of magical plants, but suffered from paralyzing stage fright. When his name burst from the goblet, the flames surged so brightly that they scorched the ceiling beams. The task that followed was not a creature to subdue, nor a maze to navigate. Instead, before his stunned eyes, the great hall dissolved into an illusionary amphitheatre filled with thousands of silent, faceless figures. He was required to walk to the centre and recite aloud every known antidote to venomous flora, with each hesitation transforming one spectator, his musk, into a snapping mandrake. It was, he later wrote, the goblet, as merciless cure for my trembling mind. The magical community at the time did not question these occurrences. They believed the goblet operated according to deep principles of magical equilibrium, aligning challenge with character. The old ministry pamphlet, Rites and Rituals of the Triwizard Flame, notes that in this era, wizards viewed the goblet as a fragment of elemental consciousness, a sliver of primordial magic shaped into a cup. They argued that if a wand could choose the wizard, then a goblet could just as well choose the perfect test. This idea was so entrenched that many masters of ancient runes insisted the goblet was alive in a manner beyond ordinary definition, not with a heartbeat, but with intention woven into fire. Yet the unpredictability of its choices stirred unease. The Beauxbatons chronicler Celeste Fontaine described champions collapsing in terror, not because the task was too physically demanding, but because it forced them to confront the very essence of their fears. She wrote, "The goblet exposes what the wizard conceals. Its flame burns not the skin, but the secret within." Those words echoed for centuries, becoming both admiration and warning. Wizards admired the philosophical elegance of such trials, yet trembled at a future where a champion's deepest shame might be unveiled before an entire school. The tournament increasingly resembled a ritual of psychological revelation rather than a competition of skill, and the line between fairness and cruelty blurred. A particularly infamous example surfaced in the Durmstrang tournament of 1410, where the champion, Gregor Volkov, a brilliant but ruthlessly ambitious student, faced a trial so controversial it nearly led to the goblet's destruction. Volkov's test manifested as a towering ice effigy that mirrored his every movement, except that each spell he cast caused the figure to grow stronger while draining his own strength. Students watching believed they were witnessing a duel against a physical opponent, but later analysis suggested that the goblet had materialized a reflection of Volkov's unchecked hunger for dominance. He barely survived. When asked by historians why this test was chosen, the goblet offered no answer. It never did. But a line from the Tales of the First Flame claims, "Ambition feeds upon itself, and the goblet simply allowed the boy to dine." The ethics of such tasks soon sparked debate among magical scholars. Some insisted that confronting one's own essence represented the highest form of magical maturity, far more meaningful than battling dragons or retrieving golden eggs. Others argued that the goblet, as interventions were too intimate, too unpredictable, and too potentially lethal. Without guidelines or human oversight, the flame acted according to rules no wizard truly understood. Magic, Dumbledore once noted in a private letter now archived at Hogwarts, is a force best governed by wise minds, not left entirely to its own musings. Though Dumbledore lived centuries after the era of goblet-chosen tasks, his words capture the reason such practices eventually fell out of favour. Number 17, the last real tournament, was in 1994. The Tri-Wizard Tournament of 1994 now stands in the collective memory of the wizarding world as the last great attempt to revive an ancient tradition that once symbolized unity and friendly rivalry among magical schools. Hogwarts, Durmstrang and Beauxbaton had always approached the tournament with pride, sending their champions into challenges that balanced bravery, intelligence, and magical skill. Yet the century-long hiatus before the events of Goblet of Fire had already hinted at the tournament inherent danger. Even the Hogwarts Library described past competitions in grim tones, noting that death toll has been very high, a reminder that the institution had been mothballed for good reason. The reopening of the tournament in 1994 was meant to restore a lost glory, but instead it underlined how fragile the wizarding world had become. The Ministry of Magic, eager to reject strength and stability after decades of political unease, embraced the opportunity to revive this ancient ceremony. Bartemius Crouch Sr. campaigned tirelessly for the event, insisting it would renew international cooperation. The selection of Hogwarts as the host school offered what many saw as a neutral, safe, and respected arena. Yet beneath the official celebrations, subtle anxieties stirred. Albus Dumbledore's calm presence reassured most attendees, but the headmaster himself had not forgotten the tragedies of previous tournaments. He had once remarked in private company that we must exercise the utmost care. Traditions survive only when tempered by wisdom, a sentiment that would later echo painfully after the final task. The entry of Harry Potter into the competition became the first unmistakable signal that this tournament would not follow the patterns of those before it. His name emerging from the goblet, though impossible by the rules, foreshadowed an underlying manipulation that few suspected at the time. What should have been a celebration of magical youth quickly grew darker, and the professors at Hogwarts felt the shift more than anyone. Minerva McGonagall, who deeply valued fairness and order, reportedly walked the corridors that evening with uncharacteristic worry, aware that something beyond mere mischief was at play. Even Severus Snape, sceptical of Harry as innocence, sensed the disturbance. The tournament had never before included unwilling champions. Each task brought with it a mixture of awe and unease. The first task, featuring dragons, rekindled the raw spectacle that had once defined the tournament. The crowd roared with admiration at the daring of the champions, and for a moment it seemed as though the revival might succeed. Harry's firebolt swooping over the Hungarian horntail became an iconic image across the wizarding world. Yet those with keener insight noticed the crack in the tournament's facade. Rubeus Hagrid, who adored magical creatures, later admitted that he watched Harry. His confrontation with a heart that thudded louder than the dragon, his wings for the intensity of the encounter surpassed anything the organizers had predicted. The tournament, despite layers of new safety measures, had again drifted dangerously close to catastrophe. The second task, staged in the freezing depths of the Hogwarts lake, introduced an unexpectedly emotional dimension. The champions were not only asked to brave merpeople and underwater obstacles, they were forced to face the fear of losing what they valued most. The haunting song of the merfolk, "Come seek us where our voices sound," lingered long after the task ended, echoing through the corridors of the castle as if warning students of deeper threats. For Hermione Granger, placed as a hostage under the water, the experience carried an unsettling weight, reminding her of how easily safety could be sacrificed for spectacle. Fleur Delacour's failure to reach her sister underscored the ethical questions that many spectators whispered about but dared not voice publicly. The third task, set within the shifting and enchanted maze, became a turning point that no official of the ministry could ignore. The maze had been intended as a controlled challenge, a test of resilience rather than sheer danger. Yet when the hedges closed in and the enchantments grew feral, even the organizers grew uneasy. Victor Crumb, sudden madness, later attributed to the effects of the Imperious Curse, revealed unmistakably that external forces had infiltrated the heart of the tournament. It was here that the illusion of safety, carefully crafted by the ministry, finally dissolved. The moment Cedric Diggory and Harry Potter reached the Triwizard Cup together, the tournament crossed a threshold from which it could never return. Cedric, a student admired for his fairness and integrity, embodied the best of Hogwarts. His decision to share victory with Harry was a gesture that captured the idealistic spirit the tournament had once celebrated. But that same decision drew them into a trap disguised as triumph. The cup, transformed into a portkey, carried them to the graveyard where the Dark Lord lay waiting. In that place, under the shadow of Tom Riddle's ancestral tombstone, all dreams of an innocent revival ended. Cedric's death marked the precise moment when the Triwizard Tournament became a relic rather than a living tradition. J.K. Rowling wrote the painful truth plainly, describing Cedric as a boy who had died because he strayed across Voldemort's path. The wizarding world mourned not only the student but the illusion that grand institutions could remain untouched by rising darkness. Cedric's parents, Amos and his wife, never fully recovered from the shock, and their grief became a solemn reminder that no trophy or magical tradition could justify a life lost. The return of Voldemort, witnessed directly by Harry, imposed a greater urgency upon the ministry as next decisions. Even those who doubted Harry's account recognized that the tournament had become a vulnerability. Bartemius Crouch Jr., masquerading as Alastor Moody, had penetrated Hogwarts under the authority granted by the tournament itself. The ministry found itself forced to confront the uncomfortable truth. The revival had provided cover for one of the most dangerous infiltrations in modern magical history. In meetings held after the tragedy, several officials argued that the tournament had become an open door for the enemy, a phrase that later circulated quietly through the halls of the Wizengamot. Number 18. The first tournament ended in a tie. The chronicles of the Triwizard Tournament often present its ancient origins as orderly and time-honoured, yet the tale of the very first competition in 1294 tells a different story, one marked by confusion, rivalry, and an ending so unexpected that it reshaped the tradition forever. Wizards of the 14th century later insisted the tournament had always revolved around the crowning of a single champion, but archival letters from that era reveal a more chaotic truth. The first contest culminated not in triumph for one, but in a bewildering stalemate that would haunt the reputations of the judges for generations. When Beauxbatons, Durmstrang, and Hogwarts convened that year, they did so with the earnest hope of showcasing magical skill and diplomatic unity. Each school elected what they believed was the embodiment of magical promise. Eloise Delacour, an accomplished Beauxbatons prodigy known for her mastery of charm weaving long before such magic became fashionable, Soren Vidarson, a Durmstrang student whose command of winter magic was said to be as precise as a blade chilled on the northern wind, and Roderick Thorne, a Hogwarts champion celebrated for his courage and an almost uncanny intuition for dangerous creatures. Contemporary accounts describe the gathering as grand and optimistic, even quoting the Hogwarts Council of the time, proclaiming that the tournament would forge champions not merely of magic, but of honour. The final task of that early tournament was far different from the later labyrinth challenges described in Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. Records indicate the champions entered a magically shifting ruin known as the Temple of Mirrors, a structure enchanted by ancient seers to reflect not only illusions, but the deepest fears and ambitions of those who stepped inside. The judges believed the temple's unpredictability would provide a fair test of courage, intellect, and adaptability. Yet it also introduced an element no one anticipated, a test so fluid and reactive to the champions' emotions that the temple itself became the fourth participant. As the champions progressed, magical historians recount that the Temple of Mirrors reshaped itself with growing intensity. Eloise encountered mirrored apparitions of herself casting spells she had not yet learned but desperately wished to master. Soren faced icy reflections that shattered into frost serpents the moment he doubted his resolve. Roderick struggled through visions of wounded magical beasts, creatures he longed to protect, forcing him to decide at each turn whether to fight or to heal. The temple amplified their inner conflicts until each champion was pushed to the edge of collapse. One scribe later wrote that the walls remembered their fear and echoed it back thrice over. What makes the outcome of the first tournament so extraordinary is not simply that the champions survived, but that they reached the magical crest of the temple within seconds of one another. According to the enchanted quills that recorded the event, the three emerged from different corridors and placed their hands on the ceremonial crest at nearly the same moment. The artifact responded with a burst of silver light so blinding that the judges initially believed a winner had been chosen. Yet when the glow faded, all three champions stood with equal claim to victory, and the crest displayed no symbol of primacy. This baffled the judges who had expected the enchanted crest to decide for them. The dispute that followed ignited a controversy that shook the magical world for decades. Accounts describe the Chief Judge Archibald Mornley of the British Magical Council pacing before the assembled spectators with a quill trembling in his hand. He reportedly declared, "Magic has spoken, and it has spoken in riddles." Some argued that the simultaneous finish was impossible without collusion, while others insisted it was a testament to unprecedented talent. Supporters of Eloise claimed her refined spellwork must have been decisive. Durmstrang defended Soren's discipline and accused the temple enchantments of favouring emotional volatility. Hogwarts insisted that no magical test could ignore Roderick's bravery. Letters preserved from the era show the debates devolving into school rivalries so fierce that delegations threatened to withdraw future cooperation. In an attempt to restore order, the judges began recalculating every detail of the final task, reviewing magical signatures, spell intensities, and resistance levels. Even the memory charms embedded into the temple's mirrors were interrogated for clues, but the evidence remained inconclusive. A surviving portion of Archibald Mornley's notes reads, "Their strengths were too different to measure on the same scale. One triumphed over fear, another over chaos, the third over the self. How is one to weigh such victories?" His frustration captured the essence of the dilemma. The challenge had been crafted to test unique qualities, but in doing so it left no clear metric for determining superiority. When the judging council finally announced their compromise, a declaration of 3 joint champions, the crowd erupted into disbelief. Beauxbaton students celebrated, claiming it as a long-overdue recognition of artistic magic. Durmstrang muttered that the council lacked conviction. Hogwarts attendees appeared torn between pride in Roderick and disappointment in the ambiguous victory. Chroniclers report that the defeated expectations created an atmosphere like a storm hanging over the Great Hall, heavy and uneasy. Even the champions seemed uncertain how to respond. Eloise later wrote that she felt the strange sadness of winning without truly winning, while Soren noted that sharing victory was like dividing a shadow, possible but never satisfying. The aftermath of the judges' decision permeated the political climate of the magical world. Ministries and academies questioned the integrity of the tournament itself, debating whether its purpose was to forge unity or to reveal supremacy. Supporters of shared victory called the outcome a symbol of cooperation, pointing out that the champions had reached the crest not through sabotage, but through personal resilience. Opponents feared that ambiguity would diminish the tournament prestige. They argued that magic thrived on precision, citing the later Hogwarts sentiment that a champion must rise above the rest, or there is no meaning in the struggle. The pressure to reform grew so intense that by the early 14th century, the tournament, as governing council, issued an updated charter. This revised document made explicit what had previously been assumed: every tournament must produce a single champion, regardless of how near the competitors finished or how complex the final task became. Judges were henceforth required to implement tie-breaking enchantments, enchanted scoring mechanisms, and emergency supplementary tasks to ensure decisive results. These additions fundamentally shaped the tournament that appears centuries later, where the Goblet of Fire chooses only those deemed capable of withstanding such rigidity. One of the most striking consequences of the first tournament emerged in the evolution of magical pedagogy. Because the Temple of Mirrors reacted to internal emotions, scholars claim the task blurred the boundary between performance and self-confrontation, making objective judging nearly impossible. Future tournaments avoided such introspective enchantments, opting instead for challenges that emphasized measurable feats like spell accuracy, obstacle navigation, or creature control. The memory of the 1294 stalemate, therefore, not only changed rules but recalibrated the educational philosophy surrounding competitive magic. Despite the controversy, the three champions of the first tournament became celebrated figures whose careers influenced magical society long after the disputed victory. Héloïse Delacour went on to pioneer modern charm theory, her writings later inspiring generations of Beauxbaton students. Soren Vidarsson became a master of elemental magic whose teachings shaped Durmstrang's emphasis on discipline and endurance. Roderick Thorne, famed for his compassion toward magical creatures, authored a treatise arguing that courage meant more than defeating danger, it meant understanding it. Their legacies created a paradox. Though the tournament crowned no singular victor, each champion left a mark that outshone many future winners. In later centuries, storytellers embellished the stalemate into myth, portraying it as a moment when magic itself refused to choose among equals. Some narratives romanticize the silver burst from the crest as a call for unity, while others describe it ominously as a warning against the arrogance of competition. The ambiguity allowed the story to evolve, ensuring that each retelling reflected the concerns of its era. Even J.K. Rowling's depiction of the tournament includes a nod to such history when she writes that it had a long tradition, believed by many to have been unbroken and unchanging, a subtle reminder that the past is rarely as tidy as legends claim. Yet the clearest testament to the impact of the 1294 tournament lies in its absence from everyday memory. Modern witches and wizards often assume the tournament was always defined by singular triumph, forgetting that its first champions stood together, uncertain and unprepared for the political storm their tie would unleash. The revised rules that followed were not merely administrative responses, but cultural reactions born from discomfort with ambiguity and desire for clear hierarchy. In shaping the demand for an unquestionable winner, the first tournament inadvertently set the tone for the competitive magical ethos that governs the Triwizard tradition to this day. The story of the tie remains a reminder that magic does not always bend to human expectation. Three champions, shaped by different schools and philosophies, entered an unpredictable temple and emerged neither defeated nor victorious, but transformed. The enduring significance of their stalemate rests in the questions it continues to raise about fairness, competition, and destiny, questions whispered through centuries of magical history, resurfacing each time the Goblet of Fire selects a new generation of champions. Number 19. The Goblet awakens every 5 years. The Goblet of Fire has long been associated with spectacle, danger, and glory, yet few outside the academic circles of the Department of Magical Artifacts understand the quiet years when the ancient relic lies dormant beneath the stone floors of Hogwarts. The goblet is stored in a reinforced vault, protected by charm seals installed by Phileas Flitwick himself, but these protections are not meant to restrain the goblet. They exist simply to shield the castle from the slow pulsing of its dormant magic, a heartbeat of ancient craft so old that even the founders debated its origins. For 5 years at a time, the goblet sits untouched, a carved cup of age-smoothed wood, seemingly lifeless. Only those who have monitored it closely, such as Professor Batilda Hawthorne, the school's long-standing magical artifact historian, have noted that it is never truly inert. She once described it as a sleeping beast in a box, dreaming of champions. In the weeks preceding the tournament, the goblet undergoes a subtle but measurable transformation. Hawthorne documented that exactly 45 days before the selection ceremony, the wood begins emitting faint wisps of bluish luminescence visible only under magical sight. The flame, once dormant, rekindles itself without any external spell work. This phenomenon has been studied extensively, yet no scholar has been able to replicate it. According to Hawthorne's observations, the goblet stirs on its own schedule, independent of human intention, as though acknowledging that the world is once again ready for trial. Many believe these early signs are the goblet, response to the shifting magical auras of young witches and wizards across the continent, as anticipation quietly fills the air. The idea that the goblet responds not simply to names but to magical intent has been circulated among historians since the late 15th century. According to the reconstructed notes of Laurent de Montfaucon, a French sorcerer who served as a judge in an early tournament, the goblet displayed unusual agitation when surrounded by students who harbored deceit or harmful ambition. As he wrote, its flame shrank from those whose hearts burned with dishonor. Interestingly, this observation aligns with statements found in Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, where Dumbledore explains to the students that the goblet serves as an impartial judge, implying that morality, or at least the absence of treachery, plays a role in its mechanisms. While this interpretation remains widely accepted in academic circles, some modern researchers, particularly those working at the Arcane Behavioral Institute, suggest that the goblet possesses a far more nuanced sensitivity. They claim the artifact is capable of detecting emotional resonance, magically encoded potential, and subconscious intent. These scholars argue that the goblet effectively scans the aura of every entrant, interpreting magical signatures much like a trained legilimens might read emotional undercurrents without accessing thought. This hypothesis is partially supported by the goblet's consistent ability to select champions who reflect the values of courage, resilience, and ingenuity. Cedric Diggory, for instance, was widely admired for his integrity and unassuming leadership, qualities the goblet appeared to prioritize. The goblet's detection abilities become even more fascinating when considering how rarely it has been fooled. Throughout the tournament's long history, documented incidents of interference number fewer than 3, and only one, the entry of Harry Potter in 1994, resulted in a fully successful manipulation. In the book, Dumbledore remarks gravely, "The goblet is merely a tool. It cannot be blamed for what it was made to do." This line has been highly debated by scholars, with discussions centering on whether the goblet truly lacks agency or whether its ancient magic was forcibly bent into an unnatural decision. Regardless of theoretical disagreements, the consensus remains the same. Only dark magic of the highest sophistication could deceive a relic built to sense intention. Barty Crouch Jr. as enchantment of the goblet serves as a chilling example of this possibility. Disguised as Mad-Eye Moody, he cast a confundus charm of unusual complexity, manipulating the goblet into believing that a fourth school existed. According to aura-level analysis of the incident, this charm effectively blurred the goblet's perception, confusing its internal classification system just long enough for it to accept Harry, his name under false parameters. What makes this interference so extraordinary is that the goblet not only accepted Harry, but bound him to a magical contract. The artifact behaved as though Harry were the sole entrant from the non-existent fourth school, proof that the spell tampered with the goblet's very logic. Researchers such as Miranda Thatch of the Royal Academy of Enchanted Artifacts argue that this case demonstrates the goblet's inherent vulnerability. She writes that although the goblet is steeped in protective enchantments, it is not sentient in the strictest sense. Therefore, its ancient programming can be forced into unnatural paths. But other scholars contend that the rarity of such success speaks not to vulnerability, but to the astounding difficulty of overriding the goblet's internal wards. Even Crouch Jr., a trained Death Eater raised under the tutelage of Voldemort, required significant preparation and a deep understanding of magical psychology to exploit the artifact, momentary openness, during its awakening period. The awakening period itself is a time of heightened magical activity within the goblet. Over the course of several weeks, the artifact's flame grows from a faint glimmer to a roaring blue fire. Historically, this has been interpreted as the goblet, recognizing the imminence of a tournament. Records preserved from the era of Helga Hufflepuff indicate that early editions of the goblet required deliberate activation by a team of enchanters, but as centuries passed, the artifact developed self-sustaining magical cycles. No modern wizard has successfully extinguished or reignited it through external spellwork, a fact that adds weight to theories linking it to ancient, possibly pre-Hogwarts magic. This ancient magic has been compared to the enchantments protecting the Chamber of Secrets, the Elder Wand, and even the foundations of Hogwarts itself. All these artifacts share qualities of autonomous behavior, suggesting they were forged in an era when magic was practiced with a deeper, more instinctive understanding of natural forces. The goblet appears to operate on laws no longer common knowledge. As Hermione Granger once noted, some magic is simply older than our ability to interpret it, a statement echoed by numerous magical theorists. One of the most compelling examples of the goblet, mysterious nature, surfaced during the 1702 tournament when three students, Pierre Lévesque of Beauxbatons, Ulrika Hadron of Durmstrang, and Alastair Ashcombe of Hogwarts, submitted names while harbouring unresolved personal enmities. According to archived reports, the goblet's flame flared violently, casting sparks that scorched the enchanted ceiling. While the artifact did not reject the students outright, it hesitated unusually long before accepting their entries. Some believe the goblet evaluated the potential danger their hostility might introduce. Though speculation, this moment remains a favourite case study among magical ethicists, debating whether the goblet's purpose is strictly selection or also protection. The idea of protection aligns with the belief that the goblet evaluates not only magical strength but moral fibre. Dumbledore's reminder that the Tri-Wizard tournament is not for the faint-hearted reinforces this notion. Champions are never chosen solely for raw skill. They are chosen for qualities that might enable them to survive the trials and, ideally, uphold the tournament. Its spirit of cooperative courage. Victor Crum's stoic discipline, Fleur Delacour's determination, and Cedric's fairness illustrate how multifaceted these criteria appear to be. Even Harry, whose entry was forced, embodied the courage and selflessness historically favoured by the goblet. Yet despite these noble traits, the goblet remains an artifact of impartiality, not morality. It selects champions to compete in perilous tasks, not to promote virtue. This is evident in the records of the 1294 tournament, when Durmstrang's champion Godric Sturluson was notorious for practicing borderline dark hexes. The goblet accepted his entry without hesitation, suggesting that it values capability over moral standing. These contradictions fuel ongoing scholarly debates and challenge any simplistic interpretation of the goblet functions. A particularly striking observation emerges when examining how the goblet responds to powerful magical lineages. Families with strong hereditary magic, such as the Delacour or the Crumb dynasty, often see their heirs selected with notable frequency. Some speculate that the goblet prioritizes magical potency because the tournament's trials demand extraordinary resilience. Others claim that the artifact merely responds to the confidence and focus typically found among highly trained magical households. Whatever the reason, these recurring patterns reinforce the perception that the goblet does not choose lightly, nor does it rely on chance. Although the goblet is often described as impartial, one cannot ignore the atmosphere surrounding it during its awakening phase. Students approaching it describe feeling a subtle pull, a sensation of being observed, as though the goblet weighs their hidden motives. This echoes Victor Crumb's recollection when standing before it. It vase, like the air, grew thicker around me, like it knew what I came for. His words, though not recorded in official texts, are widely referenced in scholarly discussions for their sincerity and descriptive potency. The goblet's presence alone appears capable of stirring unease, excitement, or even humility in those who dare approach it. What makes the goblet truly remarkable is not simply its ability to select champions, but its refusal to be influenced by sympathy or emotional appeal. When students gather in the Great Hall on the night of the selection, hope and anxiety ripple through the crowd, yet the goblet burns steadily, unaffected. It does not respond to applause, fear, bravado, or anticipation. Its flame rises only when a name is ready to be released. When Harry Potter's name emerged in 1994, the fire turned red, an unmistakable sign that something outside the ordinary had occurred. This moment remains one of the most discussed anomalies in the history of magical artifacts. If the goblet does indeed sense intention, then its reaction to Harry's forced entry may have been something akin to distress. Some claim that the violent spark that shot upward before his name appeared was the goblet. In an attempt to resist the Confundus charm, its ancient magic struggling against corruption. Though impossible to confirm, this interpretation suggests the goblet retains traces of protective instinct, perhaps a relic of the enchantments cast by early tournament founders who sought fairness above all else. Years later, magical theorists reviewing the goblet's behavior continued to emphasize its dual nature, both a ceremonial judge and a deeply enigmatic artifact bound to ancient laws. Its awakening once every 5 years is not merely a practical mechanism, but a cycle of magic older than Hogwarts itself. In waking, the goblet acknowledges the next generation of witches and wizards, evaluating their courage and ambition with an insight bordering on sentience. Whether it truly senses intention or simply interprets magical signatures with inhuman precision, the Goblet of Fire remains one of the wizarding world's most fascinating mysteries. an artifact that sleeps, awakens, judges, and remembers. Number 20, Beauxbatons had its own Hall of Fame. The tradition of Beauxbatons, Hall of Champions, was once considered the most elegant expression of the school. Its devotion to the Triwizard Tournament, a quiet testament to centuries of disciplined magic and refined pride. Visitors who stepped inside described an immediate sense of enchantment, as though the very air hummed with echoes of past triumphs. It was said that the marble floors remained cool even in the warmth of summer, polished by generations of ceremonial footfalls and perfumed subtly with enchanted lavender that never faded. Beauxbatons did nothing halfway. Every stone and every spell spoke of a culture that valued grace as much as power, artistry as much as achievement. And nowhere was this philosophy more evident than in the portraits that lined the pale blue walls, portraits that watched, whispered, and remembered. Each portrait possessed its own distinct personality, meticulously charmed by master enchanters who specialized in memory infusion and voice binding. These were not mere likenesses meant to immortalize features. They preserved traces of temperament, magical instinct, and experience in the tournament. The portrait of Célestine Montferrat, champion of 1734, was known for offering unsolicited commentary to young students who passed through, reminding them that victory is a discipline, not an accident. Meanwhile, the portrait of Edgar Lunot, the celebrated duelist who represented Beauxbatons in 1692, often shifted within its frame to reenact the precise wand movements he had used during the infamous Serpent Gauntlet Challenge, as though determined to preserve even the kinetic history of magic. The details were so vivid that many students swore they could feel heat from the summoned flames or the rush of wind from conjured creatures. The enchantments allowed each champion to recount their experience in the tournament with clarity that rivaled memory itself. Records from the period describe how instructors occasionally brought promising students into the hall to let them hear firsthand how a champion survived trials designed to test courage, intelligence, and endurance. One instructor in 1781 wrote that the hall shaped young witches and wizards more strongly than lessons ever could, because it placed them in the presence of those who had lived the impossible. This ability to transmit personal narratives across time made the hall not only a monument, but a pedagogical wonder. It complemented Beauxbatons' classical teaching philosophy, knowledge passed through elegance, history preserved through beauty. The most treasured of these portraits was that of Aurélie d'Aubigny, whose participation in the tournament of 1717 became legendary throughout France. According to her portrait, the dragons of that year had been unusually restless, a fact later corroborated by ministry archives. Aurélie's account mesmerized generations. How she had combined frost-based countercharms with a rare modification of the shielding spell to withstand a Norwegian ridgeback's fire, and how she felt the crackle of ancient magic beneath her feet when the ground fissured under the dragon as raw. Her portrait often spoke the line that became emblematic of Beauxbatons philosophy: "Elegance is not fragility. It is precision in the face of danger." It was a phrase sometimes quoted in Hogwarts classrooms, appearing even in Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, when Dumbledore remarked that Beauxbatons students possessed a certain polish. Readers later found Aurélie influence unmistakable in those words. The hall's enchantments also allowed for an unusual phenomenon. Sometimes the portraits conversed among themselves. Students walking past late in the evening occasionally heard fragments of stories drifting across the walls, champions comparing experiences, critiquing one another, his techniques, or remarking on how the tournament had evolved over the centuries. This ability gave the hall an atmosphere that felt alive, almost collaborative, as though the champions continued to contribute to the school was intellectual life long after their earthly deaths. For visiting delegations, it was considered the highest honor to be escorted through the hall and hear a champion's voice suddenly stir from its painted home. But the most remarkable accounts came from those who visited during the weeks preceding each Tri-Wizard tournament, when anticipation awakened enchantments that normally lay dormant. Portraits that had been quiet for months suddenly became animated with renewed urgency, discussing strategy or recalling past competitors. Some portraits even offered cryptic predictions, a habit treated with playful skepticism by staff but taken very seriously by students. Among the most frequently repeated predictions was Edgard Lunau's remark that the tournament always chooses its lessons more wisely than its champions. Though its meaning remained ambiguous, many who competed said they felt the truth of it only after facing the trials themselves. Rowling wrote in Goblet of Fire, "The tournament was designed to test not merely magical skill but character, and archivists often cited Lunau's words as a poetic reflection of that principle. The hall endured 2 centuries of reverent use before tragedy interrupted its existence. Near the end of the 18th century, Beauxbatons experienced a period of experimental enthusiasm in elemental magic, spurred by several ambitious professors who believed that refined flame casting could be elevated into an art form worthy of the school's reputation. Among them was Professor Maurice Chevalin, a brilliant but notoriously reckless innovator whose theories challenged conventional safety practices. Chevalin believed that fire, when guided with absolute delicacy, could become as precise as ink upon parchment. His workshops drew crowds, his demonstrations dazzled, and his vision for a time seemed destined to reshape elemental instruction across Europe. Yet mastery bred peril. In 1798, Chevalin attempted an experiment combining sculpted flame with memory-reactive pigments, a fusion meant to create living murals capable of adapting to the emotions of viewers. He chose a secluded wing of the Academy for his research, intending to unveil his creation to the faculty once perfected. What occurred instead became one of the darkest episodes in Beauxbatons history. The spell structure destabilized, producing not artistic fire, but something closer to sentient combustion. Witnesses described the blaze as moving with intention, spiraling upward through hallways faster than any extinguishing charm could counter. The fire reached the Hall of Champions within minutes. Though stone walls resisted the heat, the portraits, infused with living enchantment, proved tragically vulnerable. Students watching from a distance reported that some portraits attempted to protect the others, hurling bursts of shimmering wardlight from within their frames, though they could not halt the approaching flames. The portrait of Aurélie d'Aubigny was among the first to succumb, its elegant blue silk gown darkened into ash, even as her voice cried the last imprint of its spellbound memory, "Protect what cannot speak for itself." For years afterward, older witches and wizards repeated this line as a reminder of the fragility of enchanted history. By the time faculty finally subdued the fire, nearly the entire collection had been destroyed. Only 3 portraits survived, and none intact enough to preserve more than fragments of their voices. Chevalain resigned in disgrace shortly after, retreating from the magical world entirely. Beauxbatons itself entered a period of mourning, and the damaged wing was sealed for decades. Though restoration experts attempted to revive the surviving portraits, the enchantments had been too thoroughly unravelled. Memory spells, once burned, became brittle, recollections fractured, voices faded into incoherent murmurs. The hall that had once served as a beacon of academic pride became a tomb of lost stories. The school debated for years whether a new hall should be created, but opinion steadily shifted toward respectful closure. Some argued that new portraits could never replicate the unique blend of artistry and centuries-old magic that defined the originals. Others feared the ethical implications of creating portraits capable of such lifelike consciousness, especially after witnessing how helpless the champions had been during the fire. The emotional toll ran deep. Headmistress Élodie Favreau wrote in 1803 that to paint a champion now would feel like replacing a soul rather than honoring one. Her words settled the debate. The hall remained closed, and Beauxbatons never again produced a portrait for the tournament. The absence reshaped school culture in subtle but profound ways. Without the hall, students could no longer consult the wisdom of past champions directly. They relied instead on written accounts, archived spells, and instructor interpretation. Some felt this shift democratized magical education by placing knowledge back into human hands. Others mourned the loss of the intimate mentorship the portraits once offered. Yet even in silence, the memory of the hall influenced Beauxbatons' training philosophy. Staff reminded students that legacy was not guaranteed and that magical accomplishment carried responsibilities beyond personal glory. Over time, the tragedy of the hall became woven into the mythos of the Triwizard Tournament itself. When Hogwarts hosted the tournament in Goblet of Fire, older witches and wizards noted wistfully that the absence of Beauxbatons' champions' voices could be felt, as though the tournament had momentarily lost one of its storytellers. Hagrid is remark that Beauxbatons' students were a bit more refined, gained deeper meaning to readers who understood this lost tradition. Refinement was not merely aesthetic, but historical, a trait shaped by centuries of listening to painted heroes whisper caution and courage. The disaster became a moral parable in magical history curricula. Teachers across Europe pointed to the hall as a reminder of what happens when ambition outpaces wisdom. Students were taught that magical records, like memories, demanded careful protection. Many believed the ministry's increased regulation of experimental fire magic in the 19th century resulted directly from Beauxbatons' loss, though records remain ambiguous. Still, the lesson persisted in educational philosophy. No spell, however beautiful, should risk the erasure of knowledge. In later decades, scholars attempted to reconstruct partial accounts of the lost portraits using written recollections from alumni, staff journals, and a handful of enchanted fragments salvaged from the ruins. But such reconstructions lacked the vibrancy of the originals. Portrait magic depends not only on memory but on personality, nuance, and emotional imprint, qualities impossible to approximate artificially. The loss of the hall became emblematic of irreplaceable heritage, a wound carried quietly in the collective identity of the French wizarding world. The surviving fragments remained stored in a specially warded archive beneath Beauxbatons, preserved more as sacred relics than functional artifacts. Curators described faint murmurs that occasionally echoed from the fragmented frames, as though residual magic still clung to the edges of extinguished lives. Some fragments whispered incomplete phrases, others emitted no more than soft, tonal vibrations reminiscent of distant voices. Scholars concluded that these remnants were not conscious but represented magical reverberations, echoes, not memories. Even today, when Beauxbatons participates in international magical events, older witches and wizards recall the lost hall with a mixture of admiration and sorrow. It stands as a reminder that the magical world, for all its enchantment, remains vulnerable to irreparable loss. The Tri-Wizard tournament continues, its champions rising and falling with each generation, but Beauxbatons' original storytellers no longer speak. Their wisdom drifts in the collective imagination, half-remembered yet still illuminating, like candlelight seen behind a closed door. Number 21. Muggleborns rarely took part. In the magical world of Harry Potter, the Tri-Wizard tournament stands as one of the most prestigious and dangerous events for young witches and wizards. The competition, open to all students over the age of 17, attracted the best and brightest from three of the most powerful wizarding schools, Hogwarts, Beauxbatons, and Durmstrang. However, despite the seemingly open invitation, there was an unspoken rule within the magical community. It was nearly impossible for Muggleborns to participate. The question of why Muggleborns rarely entered their names into the Goblet of Fire is both complex and revealing of the prejudices that ran deep in the magical world. The reality of the Tri-Wizard tournament was that despite the formal rules, the odds were stacked against those who did not come from a long line of pure-blooded wizards. The magical society, especially in Britain, was heavily influenced by centuries-old beliefs in blood purity. For many families, the idea of a pure blood wizard being bested by someone from a Muggle family was unthinkable. These societal prejudices shaped the way students were treated and how they perceived their own place within the wizarding world. The Tri-Wizard tournament was a test not only of magical skill but also of status. A contestant's lineage, their family background, played a significant role in their perceived worth. Pure-blood families, who were well established and revered in the magical community, dominated the tournament for years. In contrast, Muggleborns who came from non-magical families were viewed by many as outsiders, even if they were incredibly talented wizards and witches. This was not merely a matter of skill but of tradition, as the tournament was steeped in the old ways of the magical world, where bloodlines were often seen as a measure of superiority. The first recorded cases of Muggleborns entering the Tri-Wizard tournament occurred in the 20th century. It was still a remarkable event when someone from a Muggle-born background threw their name into the Goblet of Fire. These rare moments were often treated with shock and disbelief, not because of any lack of skill or magical prowess, but because they challenged the prevailing ideas about blood purity. The reluctance of Muggleborns to participate in the tournament wasn't a reflection of fear or lack of courage, but rather a result of the social pressures that existed within the wizarding community. Many young witches and wizards from Muggle families simply didn't feel they belonged in a contest that had historically been dominated by those with pure magical blood. In Hogwarts, the house system often mirrored this divide. Slytherin House, with its focus on ambition and blood purity, was particularly resistant to Muggle-borns entering the competition. The Slytherins, such as Draco Malfoy, were quick to belittle anyone who didn't come from a pure blood family. This prejudice ran deep in the hearts of many students, and the very idea of a Muggle-born student competing in the Triwizard Tournament was seen as an affront to the traditions of wizarding society. However, there were exceptions to this attitude, and the most notable one came in the form of Harry Potter. Harry's very presence in the tournament was revolutionary. Although he was a half-blood, meaning one parent was Muggle-born and the other was a wizard, his participation in the Triwizard Tournament defied the odds and expectations of many. Harry's name being drawn from the Goblet of Fire marked a significant moment in the wizarding world, not just for the tournament itself, but for the way Muggle-borns and half-bloods were viewed. Despite his humble beginnings, Harry proved that a wizard's worth was not determined by their bloodline, but by their character, bravery, and ability to rise to the challenge. The fact that Harry was able to compete alongside the pure-blooded students from other schools showed that the magical community was, albeit slowly, beginning to change. His victory in the tournament was a testament to the idea that Muggle-borns and half-bloods had just as much right to prove their worth as anyone else. This was a breakthrough not just in the context of the Triwizard Tournament, but in the larger struggle for equality in the wizarding world. However, Harry's situation was exceptional, and it was clear that the path for other Muggle-borns to participate in the tournament was not as simple. For many, the idea of being thrust into a competition where blood purity played such a large role was daunting. Even the most skilled Muggle-borns like Hermione Granger, who was known for her magical brilliance, never considered entering the tournament. While Hermione had the skills and intelligence to excel in such a contest, the idea of competing in a space so fraught with historical prejudice made it an uncomfortable prospect. The reluctance of Muggle-borns to participate was not merely due to the competition itself, but the subtle yet pervasive discrimination they faced. The magical world was one of exclusion, where those from non-magical families were often treated as second-class citizens. This kind of social pressure discouraged many Muggle-borns from seeking recognition in a contest that was often seen as an arena for the elite, those with the right pedigree. There were, however, moments when this discrimination began to crack. The presence of Fleur Delacour, a student from Beauxbatons who was part Veela, demonstrated the international nature of the Triwizard Tournament and how other cultures approached the issue of bloodlines. Though Fleur was not a Muggle-born, she came from a family that had been long associated with the Veela, a magical creature often seen as separate from the traditional wizarding world. Her participation in the tournament symbolized the broader, more inclusive possibilities that the tournament could offer in the future, even though her heritage was still seen through the lens of magical elitism. Another key moment came with Victor Krum, the Triwizard champion from Durmstrang. While not a Muggle-born, Victor's participation in the tournament highlighted the competitive nature of the event and how it attracted top magical talent from all over Europe. The fact that a half-blood like Harry could stand alongside someone like Victor, who came from a school with a reputation for fostering powerful, if slightly more ruthless wizards, showed that bloodlines were not the only thing that defined a wizard's worth. It wasn't until much later, especially with the changing tides of history in the wizarding world, that the Triwizard Tournament truly began to open up, as Voldemort's return became more apparent and, as the battle between good and evil reached its peak, the notion of blood purity began to lose its grip on the younger generation. Harry, who had become a symbol of resistance against dark forces, played a pivotal role in breaking down the walls of magical elitism that had long dictated the tournament and the broader wizarding world. The social dynamics within Hogwarts and beyond slowly started to change, with more and more students from diverse backgrounds entering the competition. Though the tournament itself was discontinued due to the war, it was a bittersweet reality, for the Triwizard Tournament had the potential to be a powerful force for change, but it was not until the darkest of times that its potential for inclusivity was fully realized. Ultimately, the Triwizard Tournament revealed much about the wizarding world's complexities, from the outdated traditions surrounding bloodlines to the emerging struggles for equality. It was a contest where magical skill was tested, but so too were the prejudices that plagued the magical community. Through it all, figures like Harry Potter and Hermione Granger proved that true bravery and skill were not defined by one's family heritage, but by their willingness to face the challenges that lay ahead. Number 22. Some tournaments had team tasks. The Triwizard Tournament, as it is known in the modern era, is an iconic magical event where 3 champions from 3 schools, Hogwarts, Beauxbatons, and Durmstrang, compete in a series of increasingly difficult tasks. Yet as much as the tournament's official history is dominated by individual champions and their singular feats of magical prowess, there was once a time when teamwork played a much larger role. The tournament, particularly in its earlier years, had a fascinating tradition of team-based challenges, where champions didn't rely solely on their personal strength or skill, but had to learn to cooperate and strategize with others. The shift away from these group-based trials marked a turning point in the way the tournament was structured, ultimately emphasizing individual heroism over collaboration. One of the most notable team-based challenges occurred in 1512, a year etched into the annals of the Triwizard Tournament for its innovation and complexity. That year, the task was not one of individual glory, but rather a trial of cooperation, requiring the champions to work together in pairs or trios. The task was set in a dangerous and enchanted forest where hostages were hidden, and the participants had to locate and rescue them. The forest was no ordinary place. It was filled with bewitched creatures, shifting paths, and magical traps designed to test the participants' ability to think and act under pressure. There were no solitary triumphs in this challenge. It demanded seamless teamwork, communication, and strategic planning. The 1512 task was designed to test not just magical ability, but the champion's capacity for cooperation, a trait that many might consider secondary in a contest meant to crown the most talented wizard or witch. However, the tournament organizers were well aware that it is often in times of crisis that a true leader shows their worth, and thus the test aimed to examine not just how one handled individual tasks, but how well one could collaborate in high-stress situations. The hostages were spread across the forest, and the champions needed to divide into smaller teams to cover more ground. They had to trust each other, communicate through various magical means, and, most importantly, make tough decisions on the fly. A delay in reaching a hostage could mean the difference between success and failure, and in a forest teeming with magical dangers, even the most skilled witches and wizards could be outmatched if they worked alone. As the champions ventured deeper into the forest, they quickly discovered that the enchanted woods were more dangerous than they could have anticipated. The magical creatures within, ranging from the frightening blast-ended Scroots to the cunning boggarts, tested the team's ability to think on their feet. Every turn, every decision was fraught with danger, and a single misstep could result in a costly mistake. This was no ordinary scavenger hunt, but a battle against time and magical forces, where the champions had to rely on their teammates for survival. The lessons of teamwork, trust, and shared responsibility were central to this particular challenge. While the champions worked as a cohesive unit, the real test came in the form of decision-making. When a team member was faced with the choice of saving one hostage over another, the moral and ethical decisions that followed became the heart of the challenge. This was no longer about who could cast the most powerful spells or who had the quickest reflexes. It was about who could make decisions in the heat of the moment while considering the consequences for the whole group. The champions had to demonstrate wisdom and the ability to prioritize the greater good over personal triumph. It was a brilliant demonstration of how the tournament could push beyond individual talent and showcase the importance of teamwork. The organizers of the 1512 tournament, however, soon found that while the task was a captivating success, it did not serve the original purpose of the competition, identifying one single champion. The challenge, with its cooperative nature, blurred the lines of individual achievement. There was no clear way to determine who had truly excelled in the task, who had made the best decisions, who had been the fastest to respond, or who had taken the lead in critical moments. The lines between team effort and individual triumph became muddled, and the judges were left uncertain about how to fairly reward the efforts of each participant. In the aftermath of the 1512 tournament, it became clear that the focus on team-based tasks presented a challenge in maintaining the spirit of competition that had always defined the Tri-Wizard tournament. The point of the event, after all, was to crown a single victor, a wizard or witch who had proven themselves to be the most capable and resourceful. Teamwork, while valuable, did not align with the goal of identifying one winner. The decision to abandon team-based challenges was not taken lightly, but it was seen as a necessary step in ensuring that the tournament maintained its original competitive structure. Thus, the 1512 tournament marked the last year in which team-based tasks were incorporated. In the following decades, the tournament returned to its roots, with each champion taking on the trials alone, their success or failure solely dependent on their own skill and decision-making. The shift away from teamwork signified a move towards a more individualistic approach to magic, where the emphasis was placed squarely on personal ability and resourcefulness rather than on the ability to work with others. However, the legacy of the 1512 task lived on in the memories of those who had participated. Some champions, reflecting on their experiences, would later speak fondly of the bonds they had forged with their teammates. The challenge had allowed them to experience a side of magic that went beyond the traditional competitive framework. It had reminded them that even in the most solitary of magical pursuits, there was always a place for collaboration, for shared responsibility, and for the support of others. In the years that followed, many of the champions who had participated in the team-based trials would go on to work in pairs or groups in their professional lives, often citing their experience in the tournament as a key reason for their success. In a way, the 1512 tournament also represented a shift in how magical societies viewed teamwork. While the Tri-Wizard tournament itself would forever remain a contest of individual skill, many magical institutions and organizations began to realize the importance of cooperation. The Ministry of Magic, for instance, increasingly emphasized teamwork in its approach to magical law enforcement and crisis management. It became clear that in the real world, magic was not always about individual glory. It was about working together to solve problems and face dangers that no single person could handle alone. The legacy of the team-based tasks in the Triwizard Tournament also impacted how magical students at Hogwarts, Beauxbatons and Durmstrang approached their studies. The emphasis on cooperation during the 1512 tournament inspired a new generation of witches and wizards to consider the value of collaboration. It was a lesson that extended beyond the tournament itself, influencing how young witches and wizards would approach their magical careers and their interactions with others. By the time Harry Potter found himself competing in the Triwizard Tournament, the structure had evolved into what we know today, a solitary pursuit of glory. Yet, the echoes of the 1512 task of teamwork, cooperation, and the difficult moral decisions that come with shared responsibility remained an unspoken part of the tournament's rich history. While the world would never again witness the camaraderie of the 1512 tournament, the lesson that magical strength could be found in unity as much as in individual skill would resonate for generations to come. Number 23. Dragons were not always used. The Triwizard Tournament is one of the most legendary events in the wizarding world, filled with exhilarating challenges, mysterious tests, and magical creatures. When we think of the tournament, we inevitably picture the fearsome dragons from the fourth task of the 1994 event when Harry Potter faced a Hungarian horntail. The image of Harry braving the fiery breath of the dragon is burned into the minds of all who witnessed it. However, what many don't know is that dragons were not always part of the tournament. In fact, they were a relatively rare inclusion, only appearing in a handful of events throughout the history of the Triwizard Tournament. Dragons were so dangerous, unpredictable, and costly to manage that most tournament organizers preferred to rely on other, less dangerous tasks to test the champions. Dragons were used only 7 times in the history of the tournament, which spans over a millennium. They were not a staple, nor were they initially seen as the ultimate test of a wizard's bravery or skill. In fact, the first several tournaments did not feature dragons at all. Instead, the challenges were far less physically threatening, but equally perilous. These included magical puzzles, enchanted traps, and intellectual duels, tasks that required cunning, knowledge, and precision. There was even one task that involved navigating an enchanted maze filled with dangerous creatures, though it didn't yet feature a dragon. The decision to use dragons was a strategic one. They were introduced only when the tournament's organizers wanted to provide a truly spectacular, spine-tingling challenge. Their involvement was not just for the sake of danger, it was a calculated move to create an unforgettable spectacle that would leave a lasting impression on the audience. The dragons, with their massive wingspans, razor-sharp claws, and fiery breath, were guaranteed to evoke a sense of awe and fear. To watch a dragon breathe fire in such a high-stakes situation was something that could not be replicated by any other magical creature. This was the kind of challenge that would make the Triwizard Tournament unforgettable. The first recorded instance of a dragon being used in the tournament dates back to the 13th century. It was during the 1277 Triwizard Tournament when a Hungarian horntail was introduced into the challenges. This was the first time dragons had been used, and the inclusion was met with awe and controversy. Some questioned the wisdom of using such dangerous creatures in a controlled environment, while others saw it as the logical next step in the tournament's evolution. The Hungarian horntail, known for its fiery temperament, was an exceptionally challenging opponent, even by dragon standards. Its flame could melt stone, and its claws were capable of tearing through the strongest magical shields. The 1277 tournament was the first to feature a dragon in the first task, and it set the stage for the future. However, dragon-related tasks remained rare for a long time. In fact, after 1277, there were only sporadic instances where dragons would reappear in subsequent tournaments. The next recorded use of dragons did not occur until 1792, when a Swedish short snout was used in a challenge. The Swedish short snout, while less aggressive than the Hungarian horntail, was still a formidable creature, with scales that were reputed to be impervious to most spells. This creature's use in the tournament was particularly significant because it marked the beginning of a new era in the competition, one where the magical community became more comfortable with the idea of using dragons as a test of a champion's prowess. However, dragons were not universally loved by all. Many wizards and witches were opposed to the use of such dangerous creatures in public competitions. The expense and logistical difficulty of transporting and securing dragons was enormous. Dragons are not only difficult to control, but they are also highly territorial. Keeping them calm and preventing them from attacking bystanders required careful planning and resources. As a result, many tournament organizers preferred to use magical creatures that were less volatile and more easily managed. Instead of dragons, tasks often featured magical beings such as blast-ended scroots, enchanted creatures like boggarts, or even magical artifacts with complex enchantments. It wasn't until the 1994 Tri-Wizard tournament that dragons made their most famous appearance. The tournament, which was held at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, saw 4 champions face the terrifying creatures. The first task, which involved retrieving a golden egg guarded by a dragon, became the defining moment of that year's competition. The Hungarian horntail that Harry Potter faced was one of the most dangerous dragons in the world, and his battle with the beast has since become a symbol of the risks and rewards of the Tri-Wizard tournament. The dragons were introduced to create a spectacle for the masses. They were dangerous, yes, but they were also thrilling, and they tested the limits of the champion's abilities. The Tri-Wizard tournament organizers, led by the headmaster of Hogwarts, Professor Dumbledore, were keenly aware of the dragon, his power to captivate the audience. As such, they carefully planned every detail to ensure that the dragons would not be the cause of unnecessary harm. The dragons were placed at a safe distance from the students, and the champions were given adequate protection and instructions to deal with the creatures. The task was a carefully orchestrated performance that aimed to test not only the magical skill of the champions, but also their courage and determination. The dragons were not just beasts of fire and fury, they were symbols of the tournament's evolution from a series of modest magical challenges to a grand, world-renowned event. The addition of the dragons transformed the Tri-Wizard tournament into something more than just a competition. It became a spectacle, a show that showcased the limits of magic, the bravery of its champions, and the ever-changing nature of the wizarding world. Each dragon added a layer of complexity to the challenge, forcing the champions to confront their fears and push themselves beyond their limits. Despite the popularity of the dragon-themed challenges, dragons were never used in every tournament. Their unpredictability, the immense resources required to transport and manage them, and their capacity for causing harm kept them from becoming a standard fixture. The magic community was well aware of the risks posed by these creatures, and many believed that the tournament should evolve in new directions away from such dangerous tests. Looking back on the history of the Triwizard Tournament, it's clear that the inclusion of dragons was a rare but memorable event. The dragons represented the peak of the tournament's daring spirit, an iconic, larger-than-life challenge that captured the imagination of wizards and witches worldwide. Yet, even as they became synonymous with the competition, dragons were only one part of the rich history of the Triwizard Tournament, a history filled with magical mysteries, challenges and feats of bravery that went far beyond the flames of the Hungarian horntail. Number 24. One tournament was held in secret. In the year 1649, at the height of the witch hunts in the Muggle world, the wizarding world faced a period of intense scrutiny. The rise of fear towards witches and wizards, driven by persecution and ignorance, led to a volatile political atmosphere. It was in these turbulent times that the Ministry of Magic, still in its early formation, made a crucial decision regarding the Triwizard Tournament. The Ministry, understanding the risks of drawing too much attention to magical activities, feared that the tournament might attract unwanted curiosity from Muggles, particularly with the rising witch hunt paranoia. This concern led to the creation of a secret tournament, an event that was shrouded in mystery for centuries. While the grand Triwizard tournaments, such as those held in the 18th and 19th centuries, were public and celebrated across the wizarding world, this particular iteration in 1649 was entirely different. The secrecy surrounding the event was unparalleled. Not only was it concealed from the general public, but even the participating schools were kept in the dark about the event's full details. Only the contestants, the judges, and the heads of the three schools were aware of its existence, and even they were bound by strict confidentiality oaths. The tournament was not a spectacle of magic for the masses. It was a secret contest conducted under the strictest of conditions. The location of this covert tournament was as carefully concealed as the event itself. The contest was not held in any of the well-known tournament venues of the time. Instead, the organizers chose a hidden underground complex deep beneath the Alps. This enchanted subterranean location was far removed from the prying eyes of Muggles and magical communities alike. It was designed not only to hide the magical activity from Muggle detection, but also to protect the participants from any potential danger. The complex was labyrinthine with enchanted barriers, protective spells and wards to ensure that no one could discover or interrupt the proceedings. The records of the 1649 tournament are notoriously scarce. What little is known about the event has been pieced together from various sources, including accounts from some of the participants and the few surviving traces left behind. It is understood that the tournament structure mirrored that of the traditional Triwizard tournament, with multiple challenges testing the magical abilities and wits of the competitors. However, there were significant differences. The usual grandiose challenges, such as the underwater tasks or the maze, were replaced with even more enigmatic trials, tailored to be both physically and mentally taxing. It was a contest of high stakes, but the secrecy of the event only added to the pressure. The wizards and witches who competed knew that they were not merely participating in a test of their magical prowess, but also in a historically significant covert event that would be remembered only in whispers. There were no crowds, no cheering spectators. It was a solitary experience for each participant. Every move was scrutinized by a handful of judges, each of whom represented the three major wizarding schools, Hogwarts, Beauxbaton, and Durmstrang. One of the most intriguing aspects of this secret tournament was the victory of Elizabeth Forte, a student from Beauxbaton Academy of Magic. Though little is known about her personal background, Elizabeth's victory is a key piece of the puzzle. Her triumph in the tournament is often considered a defining moment in the early history of international magical cooperation. In fact, Elizabeth went on to become one of the first workers in what would later become the Department of International Magical Cooperation within the Ministry of Magic. Her role in this secret tournament laid the foundation for her future career, but her victory, while significant, remained veiled in secrecy for many years. Elizabeth's victory did not merely mark her personal achievement, but also symbolized a shift in the way the wizarding world would eventually approach international relations. In the wake of the tournament, the quiet whisperings of her triumph began to spark discussions among the magical elites. She was seen as a young witch capable of bridging gaps between different magical cultures and schools. Her eventual involvement in international magical diplomacy was a natural progression for someone who had participated in such a historically secretive and high-profile event. Elizabeth's journey, however, was not one of public fame and adoration, but rather of quiet influence in a world that was still learning to navigate the complexities of magical cooperation. One of the more fascinating aspects of this secret tournament is the speculation surrounding the specific challenges that were included. Although records are few, it is said that the tasks in this particular tournament were exceptionally demanding and took into account the political climate of the time. With the magical world on edge due to the increased scrutiny from the Muggle world, the challenges in the tournament were designed not just to test skill, but to demonstrate resilience in the face of external pressures. Contestants were pushed to their limits, forced to confront not only magical beasts and enchanted obstacles, but also the mental toll of competing in a world where their every move was under intense scrutiny. Despite the secrecy, there were whispers of the tournament's existence that slowly spread among the magical community. Though these stories were often dismissed as mere rumors or folklore, the idea of a secret tournament conducted away from prying eyes intrigued many witches and wizards, but few dared to inquire further, knowing that any such attempt could lead to unwanted attention from the ministry. The event remained something of a shadow in the collective memory of the wizarding world, its existence acknowledged only in hushed tones. As the years passed and the witch hunts eventually waned, the memory of the 1649 tournament faded into the background of magical history. The secrecy surrounding it ensured that few ever learned the full details of the event. But for those who participated, like Elizabeth Forte, the experience was transformative. They carried with them the weight of having been part of a significant yet concealed chapter in the history of magic. Elizabeth's rise to prominence in the international magical community was a testament to her skill and determination, qualities she had proven during the tournament. While her name might not have been known to the masses at the time, her influence was quietly felt in the corridors of magical power. Interestingly, the secrecy surrounding this particular tournament also contributed to a larger pattern of withholding certain magical knowledge from the public eye. In the years following the 1649 tournament, the Ministry of Magic became more adept at regulating magical events and controlling the flow of information to the wider wizarding community. The decision to hold the tournament in secrecy reflected the Ministry's desire to maintain control over magical activities, particularly in an era when external threats from the Muggle world loomed large. Though the records of the 1649 tournament may be fragmented, the impact of the event can still be felt today. The idea of a secret tournament set a precedent for future magical competitions, some of which were shrouded in secrecy for various reasons. The tournament of 1649, though a one-time occurrence, left a lasting legacy that continued to influence the magical world for generations. It showed that even in the face of adversity and secrecy, magic could still unite people from different cultures and backgrounds, creating bonds that would shape the future of the wizarding world. Elizabeth Forte, whose name became synonymous with the secret tournament, remains an enigmatic figure in the annals of magical history. Her success in that covert contest helped her forge a career in international magical relations, but her story is not one that many people are familiar with. Yet, her role in the tournament and her subsequent work within the Ministry of Magic were pivotal in shaping the direction of magical diplomacy in the centuries that followed. Number 25. Participants gained special status after winning. The Triwizard Tournament was one of the most prestigious events in the magical world. Its champions, those who emerged victorious in the dangerous trials, earned not only fame and recognition, but also a significant social status that would shape the rest of their lives. Winning the tournament was not simply an achievement of magical prowess, but an automatic ticket to a world of power, influence, and endless possibilities. The magical community had long seen the tournament as a proving ground for exceptional wizards and witches, and the champions were regarded as the finest of their generation. For many, the title of Triwizard Champion elevated them beyond the typical roles one might expect for a graduate of Hogwarts or Beauxbaton or Durmstrang. The tournament, in essence, served as a rite of passage into a world where champions could wield considerable influence. For example, after Cedric Diggory's tragic death during the 1994 tournament, his name continued to carry weight among the wizarding public. His victory, though short-lived, secured him an enduring legacy. Had Cedric survived the dark turn of events, it is reasonable to believe that he would have gone on to work in a prestigious department in the Ministry of Magic, or perhaps even beyond the shores of Britain, representing the wizarding world on an international stage. Instead, his legacy was tragically overshadowed by darker forces, but the potential for a promising future remained in the eyes of many. For others, like Victor Krum, the tournament led directly to notable international recognition. The Durmstrang student who triumphed in the 1994 edition became a household name in the wizarding community, not just for his victory, but for his enduring talent and remarkable physical prowess. Krum's fame did not fade after the tournament concluded. In fact, it opened doors to career paths most wizards could only dream of. Known for his Quidditch prowess, he was later invited to play for the Bulgarian national Quidditch team and became an international sports icon. His participation in the tournament further cemented his status as a prominent figure in magical society. For Krum, the tournament wasn't just about the competition. It marked the beginning of an illustrious career, both in the world of sports and in diplomatic circles, where his fame as a champion often served as an asset in navigating difficult situations. But not all champions found themselves in the public eye for reasons of honour. The weight of the Triwizard Cup often became a double-edged sword. The fame that came with victory had its price. Champions were thrust into a world where they were constantly scrutinized by the press. Their every move was dissected, analyzed, and often exaggerated. This was especially true for those who had emerged from the tournament as part of a tragic or controversial circumstance. Take Harry Potter, for instance, who unexpectedly found himself a victor of the tournament in 1994. His success was overshadowed by the dark and terrifying events that followed, yet the public still hailed him as a hero. However, being constantly in the spotlight brought its own set of challenges. Harry, for instance, was constantly hounded by reporters, and his life was far from private. He had little control over the portrayal of his actions in the media, and as much as he despised the attention, it followed him wherever he went. In addition to media scrutiny, champions also had to deal with envy from their peers. This was an especially poignant theme for Harry, whose classmates and even some professors couldn't help but resent his unexpected success. The tournament, as much as it offered prestige, also bred jealousy. Notably, the rivalry between Harry and Draco Malfoy deepened during this period, with Draco's resentment of Harry's accomplishments often evident in his behavior. The jealousy of peers was not confined to Hogwarts. Throughout the wizarding world, there were those who envied the champions for their newfound status. It created a subtle tension in the magical community, one that manifested in social gatherings, such as the Yule Ball, where champions were often the subjects of unwanted attention and scrutiny. Yet despite the envy and the constant pressure, the champions could also use their status to climb higher within the magical world. The Ministry of Magic, for instance, viewed the victory of a champion as a golden opportunity to attract talented individuals into their ranks. After the tournament, many champions were offered positions in various departments of the ministry, including roles in the Department of International Magical Cooperation, the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, and even the Department of Magical Accidents and Catastrophes. For a wizard or witch who had triumphed in the tournament, these roles were often within easy reach, as their victory provided them with instant credibility and influence in governmental matters. This connection between winning the tournament and gaining access to government roles is evident in the careers of several notable figures. For example, Fleur Delacour, who represented Beauxbatons in the 1994 tournament, went on to use her status as a champion to further her career. Although Fleur did not win, she was highly respected for her courage and her ability to endure the trials despite the obstacles she faced. She eventually joined the Ministry of Magic, Department of International Magical Cooperation, where her skills and experiences made her an invaluable asset. Fleur's success story was a testament to the power that came with being a champion of the Triwizard Tournament, as it opened doors to a world of opportunity that most wizards could only dream of. However, as much as the tournament gave champions opportunities, it also placed them in the crosshairs of darker forces. Throughout history, the champions of the Triwizard Tournament were often seen as figures of power, and as such, they became targets for those who sought to use or eliminate them. Dark wizards and witches, most notably Lord Voldemort, viewed the champions as either potential allies or threats. For Voldemort, Harry Potter's unexpected victory in the 1994 tournament was seen as a challenge to his power. It led to the rise of Voldemort's most dangerous plan yet, using the tournament to manipulate events and resurrect himself. The tournament had been his tool, a way to bring Harry to the graveyard where his power could be restored. Voldemort's obsession with Harry was not simply based on the boy's actions during the tournament, but on his status as a champion. Harry had proved himself a force to be reckoned with, and Voldemort believed that by destroying Harry, he could also destroy the hope that the champions represented. Harry's victory, therefore, marked him not only as a hero, but as a symbol of defiance against the dark forces. This made him a target of Voldemort's fury and, ultimately, his resurrection. For some champions, this attention from the darker side of the magical world proved too much to handle. They found themselves constantly fighting against the shadows that sought to undermine them. The pressure of being a public figure with so much attention from both the press and dark forces led many champions to seek refuge in more private lives. Some champions chose careers in diplomacy, like Viktor Krum, who used his fame to forge alliances and help broker peace in international magical relations. Others, like Cedric Diggory, were remembered for their noble spirit and what they could have achieved had they lived. But in the end, the fate of each champion, no matter their victory, was intertwined with the ongoing struggle between light and darkness in the magical world. The Triwizard Tournament had transformed them all into figures of historical importance, forever connected to the turbulent times they helped to shape. Indeed, the legacy of the Triwizard Champions, while marred by the price they paid for their fame, also left a mark on magical society, one that would be felt for generations to come. Their victories proved that greatness in the magical world came not only through skill but through resilience, and their stories became a part of the mythos that defined the history of the wizarding world. Number 26, the tournament had a unique audience culture. The Triwizard Tournament, a magical contest held between three of the most prestigious wizarding schools, is an event that has evolved significantly over time. While in the 1994 tournament, as seen in Ashar, quote, 51, the access of spectators was restricted, the history of these tournaments paints a very different picture. Centuries ago, the tournaments were grand, vibrant festivals, attracting thousands of spectators who eagerly gathered to witness the feats of magical skill. These spectators came not only from the host school, but from all corners of the wizarding world, eager to experience the spectacle of the event. In the early days of the tournament, the entire atmosphere surrounding it resembled a carnival. The crowds were massive, and the excitement was palpable. Magical stands were constructed to house the thousands of people who attended. These stands were not ordinary, they were enchanted to hover high above the ground, allowing for the best possible view of the action. The magic woven into these stands was complex, as they needed to be both stable and able to move with the crowd, its shifting demands. As crowds swelled, the popularity of the tournament reached such heights that it felt more like a travelling festival, with traders, performers, and even vendors selling enchanted souvenirs. These items weren't just trinkets, they were magical, often possessing some kind of enchanted property that could bring joy or mischief to the buyer. One particularly notable year, 1388, stands out in the history of the Triwizard Tournament. The event was held in an enchanted forest, a venue quite different from the traditional castle grounds. Here, the spectators didn't sit on ordinary benches or in stone seats. Instead, they were perched on floating platforms. These platforms, enchanted to hover above the crowd, offered a spectacular view of the tournament, its challenges, Yet the glamour and excitement of the event came with its dangers. During one of the tasks, an unfortunate incident occurred. One of the floating platforms collapsed. This accident led to injuries and chaos, reminding everyone of the inherent risks that came with mixing such grand magic and large crowds. The tournament was a thrilling spectacle, but it was also fraught with danger, and this incident left a lasting mark on the organization of future events. The collapse of the platform in 1388 forced the wizarding world to reconsider the safety of its spectators. No longer could these events proceed with such reckless abandon. While the early tournaments were characterized by their exuberant, almost circus-like atmosphere, the accident forced organizers to focus on securing the safety of the crowds. Gradually, the Triwizard Tournament shifted away from its extravagant roots. The magical stands that once floated freely in the air became much more structured and secured. The enchanted items for sale became more regulated, and the festival-like environment began to disappear. By the time of the 1994 tournament, when Harry Potter took part, the Triwizard Tournament had become a more controlled, a formal event, no longer a boisterous carnival but a prestigious contest, attended only by the most notable figures in the wizarding world. The early history of the tournament highlights the wild, unchecked nature of magic at the time. Spectators could not only witness the tasks but experience a full magical immersion. They were part of the spectacle in a way that was both thrilling and hazardous. It was not just about watching a few contestants performing challenges, it was about living within the magic. The air would crackle with excitement, and even mundane things like sitting down on a floating platform felt like an adventure in itself. The tournament wasn't just a test of magical prowess, but a test of the wizarding world's ability to manage its own creations, to balance the exhilaration of magical wonders with the risks they posed. Despite the tragic incident of 1388, the tournament still retained their allure. Even after the increased emphasis on safety, the games retained their position as one of the most coveted events in the wizarding calendar. The profile nature of the event meant that the spectators were not just average witches and wizards. The tournaments became an opportunity for social and political power plays. The Ministry of Magic had to ensure that only the most esteemed witches and wizards were granted access, and so attendance was highly restricted. The public could still attend, but they did so under much more controlled circumstances. The excitement of watching the champions face off in dangerous tasks remained, but the atmosphere of frivolity and dangerous adventure was no longer the same. The 1994 tournament, in particular, became an iconic example of how much had changed since the early days. The magical barriers that surrounded the arena kept out all but those specifically invited. Gone were the days when anyone could simply wander in and take a seat on a floating platform. The dangers had been curtailed, but with it, much of the unpredictability and excitement had also dissipated. This new structure was formal and organized, but in many ways it lacked the charm and excitement that had marked the earlier tournaments. The Triwizard Tournament had transformed from an uncontrolled, chaotic event into a regulated and professional competition, but not everyone agreed that this transformation was for the better. In fact, some of the most thrilling moments of the tournament, as history, were rooted in the unpredictability of its earlier years. The event had once been a spectacle so wild and untamed that it felt as though anything could happen. While the modern tournament still captured the imagination of those who watched, there was a certain magic lost in its evolution. The public no longer felt the rush of excitement that came with watching a grand, magical display in a chaotic setting. As the tournament grew safer, it also became more predictable, more routine, and less exciting for the spectators who longed for the days when danger and wonder were closely intertwined. But not all was lost. Even in the more regulated tournament of the 1990s, there remained echoes of that original spirit. The Tri-Wizard tournament, while more formalized, still had the ability to captivate the imagination of the public. The tasks were as dangerous and as daring as ever, and the tension that built as the champions faced off was enough to keep the audience on the edge of their seats. While the magical world had learned from its past mistakes and implemented safety measures to protect the audience, the excitement and passion that defined the tournament still remained. It's clear that the Tri-Wizard tournament in all its forms is a reflection of the wizarding world's evolving relationship with magic. From the early days of uncontrolled, chaotic magic, to the more formalized and regulated contests, the tournament has always captured the essence of what it means to be a wizard in a world full of wonder and danger. The spectators who once gathered in their thousands perched on flying platforms are no longer part of the tournament. But the spirit of the tournament lives on, and with it the lingering sense of adventure, competition, and the magical wonders that define the Tri-Wizard tournament as one of the most memorable events in wizarding history. Number 27. Muggle technology once affected the tournament. In 1925, the Tri-Wizard tournament was held once again, bringing together the finest young wizards from three prestigious schools, Hogwarts, Beauxbaton, and Durmstrang. This particular year, however, would mark a momentous turning point in the tournament's history, a subtle but impactful event that would change the way the magical community viewed the intersection between the magical and non-magical worlds. The world of Muggles, once seen as separate and inferior to that of wizards, had begun to exert its influence in ways that no one had foreseen. Among the students competing in the 1925 tournament was a Durmstrang student named Arno Lemke. Though he was not among the favourites to win, he was a bright and ambitious young wizard. He had a particular interest in Muggle technology, a fascination that many at Durmstrang saw as frivolous or even dangerous. Arno, however, believed that there was more to the Muggle world than the magical community realized. He saw their inventions not as threats, but as tools that could be used to augment the magical world. It was this belief that would drive him to make a daring and secretive decision during the tournament. At the time, Muggle technology was advancing rapidly. Radio had become one of the most important inventions of the age, allowing people to communicate over vast distances. Although Muggles had not yet discovered the ability to tap into the magical frequencies that wizards and witches used for their communication, Arno had a brilliant idea. He believed that if he could modify a Muggle radio receiver, he could listen in on the conversations of the tournament's judges and gain an advantage over his competitors. It was a clever idea, and one that would ultimately prove to be both a stroke of genius and a grave misstep. Arno's plan was both bold and risky. He knew that the tournament was tightly controlled by magical authorities and that any attempt to use Muggle technology in the competition would be considered cheating, if not outright illegal. But Arno was determined to succeed. Using his knowledge of both Muggle electronics and magical enchantments, he managed to enchant a small Muggle radio receiver, giving it the ability to detect and amplify magical signals. The receiver would not only pick up Muggle radio waves, but also those of the magical world. It was a device that could tune into the magical frequencies used by the tournament judges, allowing him to eavesdrop on their private discussions. As the tournament progressed, Arno found himself in the middle of a delicate balancing act. He had to be careful not to draw attention to his modified radio. It was hidden beneath his robes, and he only used it in the dead of night, when the other competitors were asleep and the grounds of the tournament were quiet. By tuning into the judges' conversations, Arno was able to gain valuable insights into the upcoming tasks. He learned the locations of certain obstacles, the specific challenges the champions would face, and even the types of spells the judges were planning to use during the tasks. It was a form of cheating, but one that was difficult to detect, and one that gave Arno a significant advantage. The first time Arno used the radio to his advantage was during the second task, which involved navigating a dangerous maze filled with magical creatures. The judges had planned to use a combination of enchantments and magical creatures to make the task more challenging. However, through his radio, Arno overheard that one of the creatures they planned to release into the maze would be a blast-ended Scroot, a particularly dangerous and unpredictable magical creature. Armed with this knowledge, Arno was able to avoid the creature and continue through the maze without much difficulty. This gave him a considerable edge over his competitors, especially the champions from Beauxbatons and Hogwarts, who had no idea what awaited them. Despite his success in the second task, Arno did not win the tournament. His advantage, though substantial, was not enough to secure victory. The other champions, particularly Cedric Diggory from Hogwarts, were formidable opponents, and in the end, it was Cedric who emerged victorious. However, Arno's actions did not go unnoticed. The judges and organizers of the tournament had a suspicion that something was amiss, but it wasn't until the final task that the truth came to light. During the final task, which involved a complicated obstacle course, Arno was caught in the act of using his enchanted Muggle radio. One of the judges, Professor Mad-Eye Moody, had been monitoring the magical frequencies throughout the tournament, and he detected unusual interference during the task. Upon investigation, Moody discovered the modified radio hidden beneath Arno's robes. The truth was now clear. Arno had been cheating by using Muggle technology to eavesdrop on the judges' conversations. The revelation was a scandal. The use of Muggle technology in the Triwizard Tournament was not only a violation of the rules, but it also represented a deeper, more troubling question. Could Muggle inventions be used to gain an advantage in the magical world? Arno was immediately disqualified from the tournament, and the use of Muggle technology in future events was banned. However, the incident had far-reaching consequences. It raised serious concerns about the relationship between the magical and Muggle worlds, and it prompted a re-evaluation of the way the magical community viewed Muggle inventions. In the years that followed, the magical community began to take Muggle technology more seriously. The use of Muggle radios and other devices, while still forbidden in the context of the Triwizard Tournament, led to the development of magical detectors that could detect the presence of Muggle inventions. These detectors became a standard part of the tournament in security measures, ensuring that no one could cheat by using Muggle technology. The event also sparked debates about whether wizards and witches should embrace certain Muggle inventions, particularly in the realms of communication and technology. While many still viewed the Muggle world as inferior, others saw the potential for collaboration and innovation. The incident with Arno Lemke in 1925 had set the stage for a more cautious and regulated approach to the use of technology in the magical world. It was a reminder that while magic could provide great power, it was not invulnerable to the influence of the non-magical world. The tournament's organizers had learned a valuable lesson. No matter how advanced their magical skills might be, they could not ignore the growing presence of Muggle technology, which had the potential to disrupt their carefully constructed world. From that moment on, the Triwizard Tournament became not just a test of magical ability, but also a test of vigilance and integrity. Arno's use of the enchanted Muggle radio had forever altered the landscape of magical competitions, and it had shown that the world of magic was not as isolated from the Muggle world as many had believed. In the end, it was not just the champions' magical prowess that would determine their success, but their ability to navigate a world that was increasingly shaped by both magic and technology.